The ICG is a community of independent market researchers who collaborate, share knowledge and experience to deliver value to fellow members and to clients. If you're an independent researcher and want to connect with over 400 like-minded people, gain access to our knowledge base, get inspiration, support, and advice from other members, then why don't you join us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/join, or email us at membership@theicg.co.uk. If you're a client company and want to connect with the largest resource of expert independent researchers in the world, with proven expertise across all markets, categories and techniques, then why don't you contact us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/connect, or email us, connect@theicg.co.uk. If you're a supplier and want to promote yourself to over 400 buyers of research services, then why don't you contact us? Either visit our website, theicg.co.uk/advertise, or email us at admin@theicg.co.uk. The ICG, Expert Independent Researchers.
Because researching 16 to 30s is hard, you need confidence your supplier can reach exactly the right respondents. We can definitely help. Every month, the Panel Services team helps scores of companies with quant surveys, depths, focus groups, online communities and trackers. We've built the UK's biggest youth research panel with over 135,000 16 to 30-year-old members and over 1,000 data points for profiling. Our 30% response rate means an even greater effective panel size, higher validity and more meaningful results. There are very few subgroups we can't reach. We pay clear, decent incentives, treating panelists with respect, because we believe that real people deserve real rewards. Because we're youth specialists, members find us engaging. 75% aren't on any of the panels, so answers are fresher and less jaded. We've a lively community website where no-holds-barred member-generated content gets published, peer-reviewed and rated every day. Our unique, award-winning mobile-first interface means we enjoy industry-leading levels of smartphone response. We pride ourselves on great customer service. We normally turn quotation requests around within the hour, and project managers will ensure studies always meet deadlines. Get in touch, see how we can help.
Hello and good morning to you. Today's presentation has been created to support both client and agency side researchers. I understand that many of you are relatively new to the world of communities, though some of you may have had some initial exposure, some initial experience. The webinar today has been designed to support your understanding of the benefits of using communities and some of the different types of communities that exist. We'll also be covering the different situations and scenarios where a community might be a good approach to explore a particular research project or to be used for a particular project. We'll also be discussing how to sell the approach internally by merit of these benefits. So this is me. I've been working with Stephen and the team here at Dove for the past year or so, having specialised in communities for the past 5. I've managed both large and small scale projects for the likes of Asda, LinkedIn, Elsevier, and Virgin Media, amongst many others. Some of you will have seen Tom Woodnell's excellent presentation explaining some of the philosophy behind online communities. We're going to be further building on this content today. If you haven't seen Tom's presentation before, I'd highly recommend checking it out. Let's begin. So, on to today's session. I'm going to begin by kicking off to discuss some of the various situations and circumstances where a community might add value, the various community types, and why it's so important to get the terminology right when talking to stakeholders and suppliers. Next, we're going to be moving on to planning and resourcing, starting by covering some of the key cost factors to consider, which will dictate the budget required for your community. Some tips about resourcing and planning your resources, finding the right members, and how to establish an effective working relationship with your client. Finally, to conclude, we're going to be covering some of the major pitfalls and how to avoid them. I'd like to begin just by explaining some of the benefits from the client-side researcher perspective. Clients are increasingly realizing that communities are a good way to increase customer centricity and promote better decision making. Indeed, it's the case that most research agencies now are either using or considering using communities as something like 2/3 overall, compared to something like sort of 50% the previous year, according to the latest GRIP report. Having run many different types of communities myself, I'd say that they're particularly effective for developing customer understanding, to explore attitudes and behaviours on a long-term basis, to engage customers and to support the development of marketing initiatives and communications, and finally to support innovation and NPD-related initiatives by merit, again, of that long-term approach to engagement. There are certain situations and circumstances where a community might represent an obvious choice of methodology. These can include situations where a client is looking to initiate a sustained dialogue as part of a wider company-wide objective, for instance, to instill a culture of customer closeness. You will have the opportunity to explore not only your client's brief, your stakeholders' briefing questions, but have that ability to unearth the unknown unknowns if you are looking for your members to contribute to the agenda, if you want to enable that in your community. There is also the opportunity to explore the various touch points and engagements that might exist with your brand on a long-term basis. So you will have the opportunity to collaborate and improve products and services on the basis of iterative feedback. And you'll have the opportunity further to target specific segments of interest, for instance, your target customers from time to time as and when required. Moving on, we'd like to discuss this slide which illustrates some of the differences that exist between short sales communities and the larger scale communities or panels that involve perhaps like thousands of members. Everybody has a slightly different perception when they think of the research community. So the fundamental thing to consider is how they might be distinguished in terms of the size, scale, and the purpose. When you receive a community brief, or if you see the potential opportunity for a community, you can save yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle by supporting your stakeholders or your clients to determine if their needs are primarily focused on either validation to gather qualitative feedback or a mixture of both of these things. You need to be very careful when you distinguish communities from panels. Communities from panels, those particular terms trip clients up, they get them very confused. This can have an impact on your choice of technology. It's really important not to let those tools define your approach. Once you have determined the choice on the basis of your needs, you'll be better placed to make decisions about the software that you're going to be using and how to cost and resource your projects effectively. I understand that many of you are qualitative researchers, hence you're more likely to be concerned with insight communities represented in the middle column, rather than the more extensive panel-style communities that employ hundreds or if not thousands of members with little member-to-member interaction and a tendency to focus on deployment of survey-based methodologies. I'd like to move on to discuss some of the practical community benefits from a research practitioner's perspective. Indeed, many people that undertake a community for the first time will really enjoy the experience, and they'll be very surprised by the quality of the feedback that occurs. In some cases, a client will purchase software and undertake the research in-house, but it tends to be the case that the research is undertaken by an agency that it's farmed out, in particular if that's on a long-term basis, because there's a reality that the community requires lots of time and effort to sustain commitment, particularly if you're looking to run lots of qualitative research. This effort is, however, rewarded by high levels of engagement. Many consider communities therefore a more engaging research experience for participants. As researchers, we're all effectively competing for mind share of potential participants. So the ability to deploy a vast range of different exercises helps to promote that level of engagement, including that ability to talk to other members and explore topics of interest. It's an agile methodology. Once a community has been set up, you have that ability to tap into that resource and ask questions and sustain, basically sort of develop your understanding of a particular topic area on a long-term basis, as you can dictate for that particular request. There is also the ability to have members undertake a series of tasks over time and connect the dots when it comes to gathering insights and developing your understanding. It's particularly important if you have, for instance, a customer segmentation and you want to add color and bring those segments into life, for instance, by deploying mobile diary, F-node tasks, together with a series of discussions and surveys to explore a particular area. There is the versatility, which we have mentioned before, so the ability to deploy both qual and quant exercises amongst different customers. You can separately target different groups of customers as and when required. And then finally, the volume and the depth aspect, which is a crucial consideration when it comes to planning and resourcing, thinking about the amount of time that you spend working in the community when it comes to reporting. If you just bear in mind that you're gaining a much higher level of mind share from the members that are involved in the community compared to a traditional focus group where perhaps sort of 8 members will have just an eighth of the time to contribute to the particular questions that are being fielded. You have potential to receive responses from each and every member. And for this reason, it's quite typical for communities to involve 50 members or less. That will really depend on your given brief scenario and who you're looking to target. So just to bring this into life, I'd just like to share some brief case studies covering some of our recent projects here at DUB. To begin with, we have a case for Macmillan Cancer Support. This was a project to explore cancer support inequalities amongst minority groups who would have otherwise been very difficult to reach out, sustain contact with using traditional methods or focus groups. There is the case of LinkedIn, where we engaged internal employees using structured collaboration to develop future learning and development solutions. This is a case where engagement occurred in 3 separate phases. We had an initial exploratory phase to explore attitudes and behaviours, followed by a concept development phase, where the client went away, they did a bit of face-to-face engagement and developed some concepts, which were later shared back into the community to evaluate and shortlist those concepts and tweak and refine them on the basis of the feedback gathered. And finally, we have the case of Amira. It's a super premium brand of rice. I realise that perhaps many have heard of this brand. It's only recently been introduced to the UK. Specifically, the client was looking to explore perceptions of premium, and they were looking for help to justify that premium to their consumers. So here we engaged both mainstream and South Asian consumers, and the community afforded the ability to deploy a mixed range of quant exercises. We had diaries, including a substitution task where we got people to try a different brand of rice and well, from the existing premium brand of rice that they were using and comment on the value that they gained from the product. It's a very comprehensive agenda that helped to develop some of the initiatives undertaken when it came to engaging via social media, as you can see on the company's Twitter page. So, some of the key cost considerations, indeed the fundamental cost consideration to make, is the size and the scale of the community, as this will to some extent dictate your choice of technology. Having defined those research requirements that exist, you can next consider who you would like to involve in your community, and you'll need to consider how easy or difficult they might be to recruit, which will of course impact the price. The next thing that you'll be looking to consider is whether or not you want to engage a homogeneous group, just like a single range of consumers, or if you want to target separate groups with separate activities. So for instance, in the case of Amira, we have both mainstream and South Asian consumers. And it was very interesting to see how South Asian consumers were cooking with rice. Instead of the mainstream sample, this shared potential ideas when it came to ways to develop the product, and think about, for instance, combining ingredients with the packs. Just a quick example there. So we have the layers of engagement to consider. We also need to consider the time that's required from each of the individual members. So I think it makes a lot of sense to think about the time that's required rather than the number of activities that are requested from the members, because the community is such a versatile tool and offers so many different ways to engage members. This time, however, will require money in return. So we talk about the intrinsic motivators which need to be satisfied. So you need to make the experience engaging. You'll also need to provide the community with some sort of financial incentive. Ideally, a guaranteed personal incentive combined with a mixture of prize draws and added incentives for perhaps tasks that call upon commitment above and beyond the call of duty. For instance, video diary-based tasks perhaps might not be so natural for members to participate in. There is the scope of activity to consider. So we talked about the time that might be required for members. You might want to agree with your clients some parameters with regards to, for instance, survey length or the number of prompts that you might use in discussions. Sometimes clients can be tempted to have lots of different bullet points to their discussions, almost like replicating a discussion guide style approach, trying to engage that in one exercise, but often those situations will suggest breaking that out into a mixture of discussions and survey-based exercises. Because when it comes to the back end, when you're analysing that feedback, it's much more structured. You can see the responses to each of the prompts. So yeah, that's one of the crucial considerations when it comes to deploying activities and designing those activities. You will need to further consider the range of deliverables that you're looking to suggest. These deliverables could consist of, for instance, top-line reports, marketing reports. You might be looking at potential ways to engage your client audience by devising like a newsletter that can be shared to keep people updated with what's been discussed, what's next on the agenda, etc. If you're running a long-term community, or if you're running something that's more short-term, you might just arrange for a quick check-in just to discuss the progress on that basis. Something that's often overlooked is the cost for media editing. So increasingly, clients are looking for more visually engaging styles of presentation, including show reels that illustrate some of the highlights when it comes to gathering some of that multimedia feedback. So be sure to take into consideration that aspect as well. Sometimes you can draw upon clients' resources if they have like an in-house design team to help mitigate those costs, but that can be anything equal to the time that goes into running a report for a given request. And they are the key things to consider. So when it comes to drawing up the proposal and explaining your costs that are involved in the community, I think it makes natural sense to differentiate the costs that are involved with setup from those that relate to the exec time. There is the costs for the initial planning, the initial setup, and the initial coordination that occurs in the community. And by this I mean the time that you will need to go and visit your client to discuss their research, their objectives, to learn more about their brand, and then to actually develop the technology to populate with the information that's required within the community. For instance, the frequently asked questions to help fill some of those member requests, the terms and conditions, etc. Some clients are very hands-on. They want to run that past their legal team before they have that uploaded into the community. There is the time that goes into the community designs to consider too. So you'll be in a situation where you're looking to develop something that reflects your client's brand and be sure to factor that into the costs. If your client has a database that they're looking to use to contact potential prospects, potential members for the community, be sure to factor in any time that's associated with cleaning that database or validating those members. You might wish to use separate technology to deploy a survey screening method where you can basically capture those that are eligible and explain a little bit about the community along the way. So absolutely be sure to cover that up front, those costs. There is the further prospect of adding members that perhaps your client doesn't have access to. So by this I mean non-customers typically. It could be users of a particular product or brand, whatever that might be. You might turn to a research supplier, like a field supplier that deals with traditional face-to-face qualitative recruitment for this purpose. If you're doing a short project, but typically it's panel providers if you're looking for much larger samples. Then there's of course the member incentives to take into consideration, as I briefly mentioned earlier. Next, you'll want to consider the time that goes into activity planning and development. I think it's really useful here to have a target for potentially different types of projects. So you might think of, for instance, quick projects that might combine discussion with a survey, as opposed to deep dives where you might be deploying diary and F&O related tasks, as opposed to more strategic, more long-term projects. For instance, like the case of LinkedIn, where we had a structured agenda where we were looking to develop concepts and evaluate the basis of that feedback and develop and refine those concepts. There is the costs involved in moderation, which is, I think it's always good to break those costs out and differentiate them potentially from the ongoing handling of the incentives for transparency. So when we talk about moderation, that's simply the time that goes into replying to those members, fielding those discussions, prompting, but also sort of perhaps handling some of those queries that pop up from time to time. And then, of course, we have the analysis and reporting costs. I'd like to move on to discuss credit versus project-based pricing. So if you're considering running a long-term community, you'll need to set some parameters when it comes to devising activities and reporting. Some research agencies use a credit-based approach. This tends to be more the case in North America, but it can be useful, conversely, to think about projects, as I mentioned earlier, for instance, the quick requests, the deep dives, and the more strategic elements. Using the credit-based approach, you might agree that the client has, say, 12 activity credits per month, and that each discussion, which is relatively quick and easy to deploy, amounts to 1 credit, whereas each survey, which takes time to develop programming and QA, requires 2. You can then use a separate credit-based system for reporting, so you can differentiate your top-line reports from your more extensive marketing reports. The benefit of the credit-based approach is that it helps your client to know where they stand in terms of the number of requests, but it kind of penalizes the commission of multiple activities. If you're using a project-based approach that's based around members' time, perhaps encourages clients, researchers to think a bit more strategically about the requests that they deploy and not get too hung up on the number of activities. So moving on to activity development. So I get that many of you will be very familiar with developing discussion guides, indeed experts. Using a community requires a very different approach. So you've got to really think about the range of activities that you have at your disposal and make that experience as varied and as interesting as possible to promote engagement and sustain commitment from the community. There is a bit of a story-based aspect to developing a research agenda, more of a story-based aspect. So we sometimes talk about creating a story that everybody wants to be part of. And here we're thinking about not just the members, but the researchers and also the clients themselves. And for this purpose, it's often really good just to have a bird's eye view, an initial plan at the beginning that will just have some very brief details, the activity titles, the details of the task, the key questions that you might be looking to ask, and then to highlight the value that this brings to your overall understanding in relation to a given brief. So you'll want to begin by establishing those relationships with those members. We always highly recommend kicking off with an onboarding process. This will help the members to establish common bonds with some of the other members, in particular if they're discussing things like their personal interests and hobbies. It doesn't have to be research related. In fact, we recommend that it isn't research related or focus on the topic in question. And then you can gently progress into the research agenda. The idea is that once you've gathered consent to those initial requests, then you're likely to get a much better response when it comes to actually engaging in the research focus exercises. So just like to share an example here is the 3 things about me discussion. this is a potential activity plan for a shopper-based community, just a fictional community, just to share some ideas here when it comes to the planning, some of the basic principles. Once you've gone through the process of onboarding those members, typically you want to explore more about their attitudes and behaviours in relation to the given brief, to perhaps add a bit of colour to the understanding. If you've got customer segmentation in mind and you're looking at individual customer targets, for instance, I think it's quite a nice opportunity at the beginning to deploy diary-based exercises and autoethnography exercises. For instance, here we have the What's in Store activity, where members are encouraged to go and take photographs of the products and perhaps share how the product is being used at home. You can also have people go out and undertake tasks. For instance, so the research which I did with one of the major supermarket chains was to actually go out and take photos of some of the event-related marketing, so that we could get a sense of how this compares across different supermarkets, retailers, and explore what was considered to be attention-grabbing and what really stood out to the customers. Next, perhaps you'll be looking to move on to the more research-focused aspects of your agenda. So here, just a quick example, to kind of projective style discussions. You could have people explain who a particular brand might be, if they're a celebrity or if they're attending a dinner party, to try and get a sense of that brand's unique, what it really stands for. And the familiar brand obituary task, which I'm sure you all know, where you can get people to discuss how they might feel if that brand no longer existed, if it was no longer there, again, to explore value. Then I like to conclude my communities with something that kind of wraps up, having sensitized those members to all of the various points of exploration, to have something that concludes the community, will support your brand. So there's a sense of goodwill that's typically generated in the community, in particular if you're targeting customers, and I think that's always a nice way to finish. So here we have an example where we deploy a sentence completion task. We can mention the client's brand and say it would be the world's #1 brand in X category, if but only, and you can have the members complete those words. Sometimes we wrap up with a letter to the CEO style task, or to have people write a postcode, and you can think about potential ways that you might bring that feedback to life. For instance, in the Miro project, we actually had those postcards printed up and delivered to the CEO of the company. There's the mission gap example here, where you share the company brand mission statement and develop a conversation based around the future initiatives. So perhaps, further exploring how the brand is perceived and how it might achieve its aims from the customer's perspective, using their own words. Moving on to another aspect relating to planning and resourcing, community support. So the actual exec time that goes into managing the community and looking after the reporting. For pre-task work, for diaries, autoethno, typically it tends to be the case that you'll be running a community for a period of days. It makes natural sense for just one person to lead that and manage that. For insight communities, you've got much more happening in terms of the number of activities and more extensive reporting that might occur across various different activities. There's a lot of time that goes into synthesizing the results across different activities. So here it makes natural sense for one person to lead and perhaps to have somebody else involved when it comes to reporting to support and help break down that workload, perhaps by analysing some of the activities and gathering together as a group, and then sort of determining how you will feed back in your final client's marketing report. For typical larger projects, for continuous communities or panels that last, if you're up to 12 months or longer, you'll typically have 3 people involved, potentially 4, if you've got a multi-market community. That will often include a director that's responsible for getting the project on board, reviewing the plan an ongoing basis, and just making sure that that aligns with the client's needs and business objectives. The community manager will have a much more hands-on role. They'll create the bulk of the activities and reports and oversee the project management. And then it's quite typical to have a research exec which will handle elements of the moderation and including some of the technical aspects associated with uploading the tasks, performing the QAs, etc., and just helping to stimulate the engagement. This could also include handling some of the more straightforward reports. I'd like to move on to discuss some of the ingredients for a successful client-agency partnership and indeed a successful community. You'd always want to kick off your project by arranging some face time with your client, ideally. Get into the office, try and learn as much as you can about the brand itself. You might want to conduct a research amnesty and have them reveal some of their hypotheses as a team. I think it's really important to engage the stakeholders internally and get them thinking about the community and how it might value at the very beginning, rather than perhaps just speak to one individual person. There is the opportunity also to agree some of those communications that will be featuring in the community. So, for instance, the mission, the purpose, the opportunity to share a team photo and kind of like put a face behind the names and talk about how the community is contributing to the client's understanding to build that sense of goodwill that exists amongst the community members. You will likely look to brainstorm and plan the initial set of topics for the community. If you've got a pre-drafted activity plan, then that's a great basis to do that. If you have lots of requests, then of course you'll need to discuss with your client how you will go about prioritizing those requests. In many cases, it makes natural sense to kind of have a community champion that exists at the client side that can help to filter requests if you're running a long-term project, and to help you prioritize if you've got multiple people that you are contacting with and engaging on a sustained basis. You will also be keen to confirm the format of the activities and the deliverables that you'll be producing as a result of the research. So, in particular, if the client has a particular template that they use across different agency suppliers, then you want to agree with that information up front so that you don't waste time when it comes to the reporting. And then, again, yeah, just to go back to that initial point about the activities, the parameters there when it comes to survey deployment. You don't want to overburden members with lengthy surveys in a community, particularly if it's a qualitative community, otherwise that will just, it will heighten the level of attrition, people will leave and lose interest. Finally, you want to agree how you're continuing to maintain contact and how you'll keep things on track. I mentioned the potential for sharing some form of newsletter or just checking in from time to time to discuss what's on the agenda and what's to come. You'll also probably want to talk about how you will iterate the development of your activity plan based on the insights that you have unearthed along the way, and reshape that agenda from time to time, check in with people to see if they still want to explore certain elements, because you might feel like you've already covered them to some extent with your previous exercises. Moving on to finding your members. Databases are the most obvious choice when it comes to working with a client because they're very cost effective. They typically consist of customers, but they might not cover all of the audiences that your client is looking to target. For practical reasons, it does tend to be the case that customers are engaged in the community, because when you're looking to gather non-customers, there is a cost element attached. For access panels, there is the advantage that you will have immediate access to those members, or almost immediate access, but this will occur, of course, at cost, and you will have no guarantee that those members will stay in the community on a sustained basis. I think there is a bit of respondent bias in the sense that people get used to undertaking surveys, so they don't always make the best community members compared to, say, like a database that's held on behalf of the client. But there is the opportunity to rent members and sort of look at sustaining engagement on a short-term basis and bringing people in from time to time. A lot of access panels, because they own the people that are involved, the panelists, they will, it's their intellectual property, they won't give them away for periods longer than 3 months. So that's something to consider there. You might have to turn to more traditional face-to-face qualitative recruiters, but there is the cost to consider, which is typically much more expensive. The next potential source is social media. This is particularly effective if you're looking to target very specific members. It's not necessarily cheaper to do things like advertise for a community via Facebook. So yeah, just bear in mind that the costs are around about, I would say in my experience, equivalent to what would be charged from a panel provider. Once you've gone through the motions of developing the ad, spending time monitoring your campaign and reaching out, engaging those people, you perhaps might have been better off using a face-to-face qual recruiter. There is the ability to support all of these various sources with, of course, a referral scheme. So if you're looking to snowball out that sample and have a member incentive that's based on perhaps a little cash reward, that can ramp up the number of numbers too, particularly if you're struggling to gather members using the other sources. The only disadvantage is that it is, of course, slower. So we talked about how to find members and some of the potential sources that you might consider. I'd like to move on now to talk about finding the right members. Here, the crucial thing to consider, or the crucial thing to take into account and to communicate, is that undertaking the community will require a given amount of time. It could be like a certain number of minutes, it could be a certain number of hours over a period of weeks, and just be very upfront, very transparent about the requirements that are involved. You'll want to discuss availability during the field dates. In particular, if you have, for instance, like summer holidays or if you've got Christmas approaching, just be absolutely sure that people agree to commit during those field times. If you're looking to deploy mobile tasks, mobile diaries, etc., you'll want to probably explore the device that is owned and determine, for instance, if it's an app-based methodology, which particular operating system they're using, and if that's compatible with the software provider that you're using. Our platform is device agnostic, so it can be accessed across mobile, desktop, or tablets. That does, of course, maximize the potential response base amongst the people. So it's one potential way that you can get around those technical issues linked with deploying those exercises. I find it's often good to recruit on the basis of actual behavior rather than stated behavior, so you can try and at least get a good sense of that by judging how people engaging online. If you're going directly to those sources, then even better. But you can see how people are interacting across social media. Perhaps look for evidence if they are happy, if they're comfortable with uploading images, if they're sharing video content. That's a crucial aspect to your project. And then finally, just a little bit of evidence about if the ability to create it is important, then just have people tell a story about themselves, their lives. Sometimes we can impose a word limit to keep that succinct, but just something to consider just in relation to having that member share that they're comfortable expressing themselves in the online environment. Usually that's quite a good test. Ideally, you'll be looking to cherry pick those members on that basis. I'd next like to move on to the final part of the press, which is the key pitfalls to avoid. We're in quite a privileged position here at Dub, so we see the good, bad, the ugly when it comes to running research. Of course, my role is to help our clients get the most out of their communities. So I'll often run a bit of training and help people with the planning when it comes to developing the activities. The first pitfall to avoid is diving straight into the research agenda. We see this time and time again, but we will always absolutely highlight that the onboarding is crucial, as we saw before. Start off with the easy to answer topics, and then perhaps look at ways that you can explore people's expectations at the very start of the community, because you always want to maintain a bit of space to develop that agenda and link it up with the members' interests, purely for the purpose of engagement. Ultimately, the time, the energy that you will invest here will lead to better relationships, and this will lead to better feedback and more unique insights, more useful insights for your community. Once you've lost your members, it's highly unlikely that you will get them back, so this really heightens the importance of connecting personally when the community begins. Pitfall number 2, failure to align topics with community interests. We talked about ways that we can mitigate this by having the members kind of like co-develop that community plan. So yeah, absolutely maintain space in that agenda. Also consider that variety is the spice of life when it comes to engagement. You'll have different people that enjoy different aspects of participating in the community. Some people love taking surveys, other people love the open discussion aspects. Other members will be very keen to demonstrate their creative skills, for instance, through drawing projective style exercises. So if you can employ all of those various exercises, then that will satisfy those interests. If you're running a community long term, you will have the ability to review previous past participation and see what's worked well, what hasn't perhaps worked so well. Often it's a function of the email notifications, the communications that are going out to the community. So the tone of the language that you're using is really important. It's always good to try and reflect the language that's being used in the community and avoid sounding like a research or a marketing person. And then something else to consider is that we highly recommend activities that connect with personal interests that will actively promote self-learning. So having undertaken research ourselves on our communities that we run, we always deploy a feedback survey at the end of our projects. We will typically see that the ability to view other members' feedback is one of the key draws. It's one of the key things that people find motivating when it comes to being a member of a community. So absolutely, grasp that opportunity to explore those expectations early on. The final pitfall, avoid making sporadic requests. It's really crucial to avoid over or underburdening members. It's typically the case that people will be overburdening members with requests without having gone through the process of onboarding and building up the commitment that exists. So it's really important to deploy your requests at, or at least try to aim to deploy those requests at regular intervals to optimize levels of engagement. If you're making sporadic requests, if you've got like a period where you're ramping the activity up and you're making lots of requests and then you've got a bit of a lull, then yeah, it's quite strange for the member. You know, they'll get a flurry of emails and they'll become less sensitized to each of the requests, and then they'll have a period where things go quiet. And it kind of like it stops them from perhaps like logging in on that regular basis, which ideally I'd like to see. I'd like to see people bookmarking that community page and entering on their own initiative rather than just relying on those requests. If you've got lots of different stakeholders, then absolutely I would recommend that you have somebody that acts as a community champion that helps to act as a filter on those requests. Make sure that they're knowledgeable about the situations where a community might add value, where perhaps it might not be so suitable. So if you're running a qualitative community, if you're looking to do a complex survey, then perhaps it's better served by running an ad hoc piece of research with a valid large-scale representative sample. Yeah, and if you do have those peak spots and it's completely unavoidable, then just try and notify those members and perhaps thinking about ways that you can boost that commitment by adding to the incentive fund, offering some additional rewards for their time. So that's my final tip, to establish a steady rhythm and tempo of requests. So that's it from me. We'll discuss how to distinguish some of the different community types, some of the crucial factors when it comes to planning and resourcing, and the major pitfalls to avoid. Have fun. Be sure to get in touch if you have any questions regarding any upcoming projects or any situations where you might be considering to use the community. If you do have time, make sure that you do check out our new website, Dobson website, where you'll find further case study illustrations of communities. We also have a blog with lots of tips on how to run communities effectively. And finally, stay tuned for the launch of our brand new mobile-focused journaling tool, which we're going to be releasing later this summer. I'm now going to hand back to Arthur, but before we sign off, we'd just like to offer the opportunity to raise any questions in relation to today's presentation.
Okay, Dan, that's fantastic. When we first started talking about this, there was a very long list of things to include, and you've managed to include an awful lot of them. So well done. It was a very, very comprehensive presentation. Thank you. Now we have questions, as always.
Absolutely.
One question that was asked was, are we, people are going to want your notes, your deck, so those will be available along with the recording via the ICG website in a few days' time, and we will send a notification out to all attendees that they're there, so that's all sorted out. One of the questions that came in fairly early on, which was from Aaron M. I don't know what the M is, but hi, Aaron. And it's a really, really big issue, which is all to do with incentives. What sort of incentives? How do we budget for incentives? We know that they can be different for long and short-term communities. Sometimes in short-term you need to be paying hard cash. Long-term communities, maybe there's a prize draw and a bit of cash. So what's your general view on incentivization, and in particular how people should cost for them?
Okay, so my view, the first thing to consider is the particular product, service or brand in question, to think about how likely people will be engaged on that particular topic, and to think about perhaps investing a little bit more if you're talking about engaging, for instance, business to business as opposed to business to consumer samples, or if you've got low engagement topic, that's something that you'll also want to consider. So for instance, financial services, it's quite typical to offer a little bit more in terms of the incentives. You'll need to consider the type of community. So if you're running more of a community panel, if you've got lots of surveys rather than discussions, then it's more typical to offer prize draws to make the community feasible, because you've got so many members. For short-scale projects, it's more likely that you will seek to reward members with a personal guaranteed incentive for their time. For instance, if you're looking to engage somebody over a period of 2 weeks, a broad consumer sample, you might offer something like £60 for 2 hours of their time spread over, could be like sort of 10 different activities, for instance. So yeah, that's really going to depend. You don't want to get so hung up with the, don't purely focus on the extrinsic reward. Think about how you can make the community experience engaging, how you can satisfy the members' interests. So just maintain that variety, as I mentioned earlier, and make the experience interesting. And invest that time up front when it comes to the onboarding, establishing those personal relationships, particularly if it's a qualitative community that you have in mind. But absolutely, I think the best thing to do, Alan, is if you have a particular project in mind, if you get in touch with me directly, I can make some further recommendations there when it comes to incentives, because each project is so different, and it really depends on so many factors.
Okay, I've got several more questions that really, I think, cover a similar aspect. Michelle Taylor says, do you experience participant bias with online communities towards those who are more positively predisposed to your brand? I will couple that with Carol Wright-Attar, who has said, how do you prevent community members from becoming professionals, i.e. no longer customers or consumers because of being too involved? And then what's the optimal level of engagement for insight communities and community panels to ensure community members are neither starved or over-researched or contacted? So, I mean, it is an interesting one. I mean, Carol's point was, she's making the assumption, hello, Carol, she's making the assumption that having people in the community might actually encourage them to become what she calls professional, but other people, I think me included, might say, well, just more experience and more valuable in the study.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with that. So I think there is something to acknowledge there in terms of sensitizing perhaps your sample to your brand over time, given that you're going to be exploring so many initiatives that are linked with your brand, you're going to make them a lot more knowledgeable about your brand. So the types of responses might vary, say, compared to a sample that were contacted fresh via a survey from an access panel. But ultimately, there's a sense of goodwill that develops. So they kind of become more connected with your brand, and I think it's kind of like this sense of goodwill that emerges. They're kind of like, they'll want to see it succeed. Eventually, you'll be left with kind of like a core group of members over time that will support you. There is a positive bias that needs to be managed. From time to time, you'll want to refresh aspects of your sample. You can mitigate this by refreshing aspects of your sample. You can consider how you deploy the different exercises. So, for instance, with Dove's technology, we can deploy exercises privately before people are exposed to open discussions through sequencing. So they're the key things that I'd recommend there to mitigate the sensitization that occurs naturally over time.
Okay, I've got another question here from Bethan Lowell, and she says, what do you think the best way to approach moderating? For example, should you remain neutral or share your own experiences with community members with more of a personal touch? I suppose the answer here might be more related to, there's nothing wrong with being, personal and approachable, but maybe, those long-standing principles that we've applied as researchers over the years, that really it's not our opinions that are important. And I'm assuming that would stay the same within a community environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to, I think this is why when you go about the onboarding phase, it's so important to discuss something that's perhaps not related to the research topic in question. So if you're discussing interest, you can enable those common bonds to develop without necessarily biasing the feedback that might be anticipated on a reciprocal basis. So yeah, really important to present yourself as a human being, to be approachable, to be positive, to be friendly. If you're contacting expert groups, then you want to demonstrate credibility or authority. You might want to draw upon clients' resources, look at potential to co-moderate in those circumstances. But yeah, typically you'll seek to match the levels of authority that exist naturally within that community. And if people like you, they'll be more likely inclined to contribute good feedback to help you out as a researcher. You'll want to mitigate the perhaps any potential for positive bias by thinking carefully about the research design. And when you share information back to the community, don't share anything that might bias your project that you had running. That's my general advice there.
And I think coming back to the previous point, my view would be that it's less to do with how engaged they get with the brand, but how engaged they get with the process. You want them to be engaged with the with the community process, the opportunity to share thoughts and opinions with peers. That doesn't necessarily bring them closer to the brand. I mean, it just means they're going to feel more relaxed and comfortable and engaged with the process of giving their opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with that. So I used to manage a community called Mum Space, and it was very much about getting mums together and talking about their lives and lifestyles, not just the brand-related initiatives that we were looking to explore.
Yeah. And we've got a final one, and this is from Anne Williams. Oh, sorry, it's not a final one. I've got another couple, but here's one from Anne Williams, which is, any tips on running bulletin boards for B2B depths? So I think she's talking about one-to-ones here.
Okay.
It may not be like the right format as we're talking communities here, but and she's looking for tips. So do you have any top tips?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can share those. We have our series of blogs on our website that would be very useful. I think with business-to-business samples, the crucial thing is going to be probably sort of getting on the phone to speak to those potential prospects, making sure that they understand the mission and the purpose of the community, why they're being contacted, perhaps to over-recruit a little bit more, given that they are business-to-business members, and perhaps they might have more of a limited opportunity to engage in the community. But they're my broad recommendations. And if they'd like to discuss that with me directly, then I'd be absolutely happy to talk further about my tips there.
Okay, this is a very, very big subject, and one that we can't manage in one Q&A. In fact, it may well even be a topic for another webinar, which is from Tessa Weaver, who says, how do you manage analysis? Well, we know that when you use an online community, particularly we'll assume we're talking about the qualitative side, because the quantitative side that you can do in terms of polls and surveys, well, that's the same as anything else.
Yeah.
But of course, the thing about an ordinary community is there's a huge amount of qualitative data coming out. So what's your general advice to people on managing the analysis of that?
So I think it's always good to kick off a task, an activity, by holding some hypotheses about what the findings might be, or getting your client, encouraging you to share those, at the start. Sometimes it's good to have a pro forma to make sure that each request provides that information from the client, provide as much background, as much context as possible. Ultimately, nobody's going to understand your client's brand as well as your client. Then the next thing would be, as a research practitioner, to just look to identify some of the key themes that are emerging from those discussions, from those qualitative tasks. Keep an eye out for some key quotes that might emerge from the community that really hit the nail on the head when it comes to illustrating the insights that you have gathered from your analysis. You want to consider how many members that you'll want to carefully consider how many members you'll have involved in that particular discussion. As I said before, it's quite good to aim for no more than 50, because when it comes to analysing the feedback, that will present a challenge if you've got more than that number of members. You also need to consider that you're producing a lot more feedback compared to a focus group. So quite often it's the case that people will run communities with smaller samples, say 20 to 30 strong. And that'll give you the variety that you require and the depth of feedback. You'll look to identify perhaps some of the extremes that exist in relation to the attitudes, the behaviours, or whatever the request might be looking to explore. And then you can go about having identified all the various things, illustrating them in further detail, or at least those that are pertinent to your client's understanding. So that's it takes time to evolve an approach that will work well for you. I like to use Excel and highlight and sort of note the themes that are emerging when it comes to analysing. I use mood maps as well. Sorry, not mood maps, mind maps to illustrate those things. So they carry analysis, and of course over time you can contribute further to your understanding. So you can kind of like include different sheets to build your understanding, connect the dots over time. If you're, for instance, looking at long-term aspects of communities' behaviour.
Yeah, a couple of other things to mention to you, Tessa. I'm sure Dub software, like most of the software, allows you to tag comments, and tagging is quite useful. So as you're going through and reading what people are saying, if you tag it there and then, it often allows you not to have to reread it all again at some future point. So tagging is quite useful. And also there's been some experimental work done with text analytics, and I've actually had a go with NVivo myself, so there are other ways of doing it. Now, we've gone over our time, but there is one specific round of questions that are coming up. But I think I'm going to have to refer these back to you outside of the webinar. So Lynn Guthrie says, very comprehensive coverage, thank you, as I'm sure we all agree. And she says, could you recommend specific software to use for short-term communities and potential costs? Well, I think that sounds like a bit of a business lead to me. So I suggest that I'm sure Dub will recommend their own software, which is fine. So Lynn, I suggest you get in touch directly.
Feel free to get in touch.
And then Franco Zazera has a similar question. What would be the annual cost of running a community? It's a bit like saying, Franco, what's the annual cost of running a survey? There are a number of different elements, such as the cost of the platform, how much you're going to use it, so therefore the researcher's time, how many people you're going to have in it, the recruitment cost and the replenishment cost, and of course all the incentives. There's quite a lot of different things, as Dan has explained. So
absolutely, it's a lot of questions to answer there.
Yeah, you can't just say around a year or 120. I know some of the bigger communities are well over £200,000 a year. So, you know, I think it really does depend on what you're doing.